The dry wind bit at Eleanor's face as the coach vanished in a cloud of dust, leaving her stranded with only 2 worn suitcases and a heart full of cautious hope. She had imagined a warm welcome, perhaps Thomas waiting with open arms, but instead, silence greeted her. Before her stretched an expanse of tired land, where the once promised Colorado ranch stood decaying like a forgotten relic. The house itself leaned tiredly to one side, its paint blistered and peeling, as if the building had long given up. The door swung slightly on a broken hinge, creaking under the breath of the wind. This was not the thriving cattle ranch described in Thomas's letters. It was ruin masquerading as promise. Movement caught Eleanor's eye. Through a shattered window, 6 gaunt faces stared out, small faces, frightened and hollow. Children, starving, bruised, and far too young to carry the weight of whatever horrors they had endured. One of them, a little girl with tangled hair and a dark purple bruise blooming on her cheek, stepped gingerly onto the porch. She clutched a one-armed rag doll to her chest. "Are you the lady who's going to marry Papa Thomas?" the girl asked softly, her voice nearly lost to the sighing wind. Eleanor's chest tightened. Papa Thomas? His letters had never mentioned any children. She knelt to the child's level, searching her small face. Where's Thomas now? An older boy appeared from behind the house, perhaps 14, though thin and worn as if he'd been robbed of his youth too soon. "He left 3 days ago," he said, his voice steady but shadowed by fear. "Said he was bringing food, and you—" Eleanor's gaze swept across the desolate property. The barn sagged inward. Fences had collapsed, and the well pump stood silent. 3 days. These children had been abandoned, alone and starving. She noticed a red mark circling the boy's wrists. Fresh rope burns. "Someone's been hurting you," she whispered, unable to stop the words from escaping. The children exchanged heavy glances, too burdened by secrets their young hearts could barely contain. The boy's jaw set tightly. "Mr. Crawford says we belong to him now. Says Papa Thomas owed him money. Says if Papa don't come back, we gotta work his land." Eleanor stood, her pulse quickening. Crawford. That name had never appeared in any of Thomas's letters. Something terrible was unfolding here. Before she could speak again, a shift in the wind brought the thunder of approaching hooves. A lone rider was heading toward them, dust swirling behind his galloping horse. "That's him," the boy whispered, his voice cracking with dread. "That's Crawford. He comes every day now." Eleanor's breath caught as her eyes fell upon a patch of disturbed earth behind the barn, barely visible through the tall grass. A fresh mound, too small for livestock, too large to ignore, and exactly 3 days old. The rider arrived and reined in his horse. Crawford dismounted smoothly, his appearance far too polished for a man who terrorized children. His clothes were clean, his face freshly shaven, but his eyes were like cold steel, calculating and dangerous. "Well now," Crawford said, his tone slick with mock politeness. "Thomas finally sent someone, did he? Though I'm not sure what a city woman thinks she'll accomplish out here." "I'm Eleanor Whitmore," she announced firmly. "Thomas's intended. Where is he?" Crawford chuckled dryly. "Thomas Brennan couldn't feed these children, let alone take on a wife. He ran off, left a debt of $800 behind." His gaze shifted to the children. "They're my collateral now." The older boy stepped forward, shielding the younger ones. "Papa said he'd come back. He promised." "Promises don't pay debts," Crawford snapped, resting a casual hand on his gun belt. Eleanor fought to keep her voice steady. "Thomas's letters described a thriving ranch, full of cattle. But I see no livestock, no signs of any business at all. Where exactly did he go?" "Denver. Business with cattle buyers," Crawford replied too quickly. It was a lie. Eleanor could feel it in her bones. "I'll wait for him." Crawford's expression darkened. "You don't understand how things work out here. These children are working off their debts. You do well to return to Boston before you get yourself into something ugly." Her stomach twisted as another realization struck her. "You've been reading his letters," she said softly. Crawford's grin turned sharp. "Thomas had a lot of bad habits. Gambling, drinking, and writing to women he couldn't afford. I've been generous letting those letters go through." At that moment, movement flickered in the tree line. 3 additional riders waited in the shadows behind Crawford. His men prepared to act. This wasn't about debts. This was a trap. The little girl tugged urgently at Eleanor's skirt, her voice trembling. "Miss Eleanor, Papa didn't go to Denver. Crawford put him in the root cellar when he wouldn't sign the papers." The ground seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's feet. Thomas hadn't run. He'd been imprisoned. Or worse. Crawford's hand drifted his gun as he hissed, "Quiet, girl." But Eleanor's mind was already racing. If Thomas was dead, these children were witnesses. And now she was too. From the distance, another group of riders appeared. Larger, advancing quickly. The sheriff. She recognized him from Thomas's descriptions. Sheriff Dalton, a man known for his honesty. Crawford noticed the riders as well, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "Inside," he barked at the children, but the oldest boy refused to move. "Tell her the truth, Crawford. Someone's going to find out what you did. Shut your mouth, or you'll join him." Crawford snarled. The boy's words hit like a hammer. Join him. Past tense. Thomas was dead. The riders drew closer, the shining badges of the sheriff and his deputies now clearly visible. Sweat gathered on Crawford's brow. "You'll tell the sheriff that Thomas left you here to care for his children while he went to Denver, that I'm only helping. And if I refuse?" Eleanor challenged. His pistol cleared the holster halfway before a quiet voice interrupted from behind Eleanor's skirts. "I already told them," whispered little Lucy. Eleanor spun. The girl clutched a small mirror in her trembling hands, the type used to reflect sunlight. She had been flashing signals to someone on the hills. "You clever child," Eleanor breathed. Crawford's face went pale. "You stupid brat, you've doomed us all." But the truth was already in motion. The sheriff and his men arrived, weapons ready, faces grim as they took in the scene. Crawford armed, the terrified children, and Eleanor standing in her wedding dress, prepared for a future that had been stolen. "Drop your weapon, Crawford," Sheriff Dalton commanded, his voice booming. Crawford's men hesitated as rifles trained on them, but Crawford wasn't ready to surrender. In a last desperate act, he seized Lucy, pressing the cold barrel of his pistol against her head. "Stay back, Sheriff. This is private business." Eleanor's breath hitched. Lucy's wide eyes locked on hers, filled with fear but also strength. "Let the girl go," Eleanor pleaded. The dirt road stretched behind her like a path into nowhere as Eleanor watched the coach disappear, leaving her stranded beneath the vast Colorado sky. The wind tugged at her dress and carried with it a strange silence. She had expected someone waiting for her, a man named Thomas Brennan, but instead there was only emptiness. Before her stood a decaying ranch, its once white walls blistered and stripped of paint. The porch sagged. The door hung crooked, swaying gently in the breeze. Nothing about this place resembled the thriving cattle ranch Thomas had described in his letters. Her heart sank further when she noticed movement inside the house. Through a broken window, 6 pale faces stared back at her, small, thin children, their eyes heavy with suffering far beyond their years. One by one, they emerged onto the porch. The youngest, a little girl with a bruise darkening her cheek, clutched a one-armed rag doll as she approached. "Are you the lady who was going to marry Papa Thomas?" she asked in a voice barely louder than the wind. Eleanor knelt to meet her eyes, her stomach tightening. "Where is he now?" An older boy, perhaps 14, thin as a reed but standing protectively before the others, spoke. "He left 3 days ago. Said he was going to get food. Said he'd bring you." She looked around at the dilapidated property. No cattle, no horses, only broken fences and an idle well. These children had been alone for days. Worse, she noticed the raw marks circling the boy's wrists, fresh rope burns. "Who's been doing this to you?" she whispered. The boy hesitated, glancing at the others. "A man named Crawford," he said quietly. "He says Papa Thomas owed him money. He says we belong to him now." Eleanor's blood chilled. Crawford, a name she had never seen in any of Thomas's letters. Before she could ask more, the distant thunder hooves interrupted them. A lone rider approached, his horse kicking up a trail of dust. "That's him," The boy whispered urgently, "That's Crawford." Eleanor's pulse quickened. As the man rode closer and dismounted, she was struck by his appearance. His clothes were neat, his face clean-shaven, but his eyes were cold, predatory. "Well now," he drawled, eyeing Eleanor like she was a piece of livestock. Thomas finally sent someone to deal with his mess. "I'm Eleanor Whitmore," she answered firmly. "Thomas's fiancée." "Where is he?" Crawford gave a dry, humorless laugh. "Thomas Brennan couldn't take care of himself, let alone these kids or a wife. He left. Owed me $800. These children are my property now." The boy stepped forward, standing between his siblings and Crawford. "He promised he'd come back," he said defiantly. "Promises don't pay debts," Crawford sneered, his hand resting lazily on his gun belt. Eleanor fought to stay calm. His letters told a very different story. He said his ranch was successful, full of cattle. "I see none." Thomas went to Denver. "Business with cattle buyers," Crawford replied smoothly. She could hear the lie in his voice. "Then I'll wait for him." Crawford's face hardened. "You don't understand how things work out here. These kids owe labor. You need to leave before you cause trouble." But Eleanor was piecing the puzzle together. "You've been reading his letters," she said. Crawford smiled sharply. Thomas was a fool, gambling, drinking, writing to women he couldn't afford. Her attention was drawn by movement in the trees behind him. 3 more riders waited, his hired men, watching. This wasn't about unpaid debts. It was a trap. The little girl clutched Eleanor's skirt, her voice trembling. "Miss Eleanor, Papa didn't go to Denver. He's in the root cellar. Crawford put him there." Crawford's head whipped toward her. "Quiet, Lucy." Eleanor's stomach dropped. Thomas hadn't left. He'd been trapped, or worse. More hoofbeats echoed from the distance. A larger group. Sheriff Dalton and his deputies were arriving, responding to a call for help Eleanor hadn't sent. Crawford noticed them, his calm beginning to falter. "Inside!" he barked at the children. But the boys stood firm. "Tell him, Sheriff." Crawford shot Papa when he tried to get help. Dalton's jaw clenched. He knew Thomas. Grief flashed across his face as his hand instinctively hovered near his gun. "Children make mistakes," Crawford said quickly. "They're confused." Lucy's voice was barely a whisper. "Sheriff, check the root cellar." The truth was finally crashing down. These children hadn't just survived. They'd set a trap. Eleanor realized why she was here, not for marriage, but to serve as witness to their carefully laid plan. "I came to marry Thomas Brennan," she told the sheriff. "We'd exchanged letters for months. But when I arrived, I found only these children, and Crawford claiming everything." Dalton's expression darkened. "Crawford, you told me Thomas left town with cattle buyers. That's what you said last week." "The situation changed," Crawford snapped, sweat beading on his forehead. Behind him, the children moved quietly, slipping around the house, positioning themselves. These weren't helpless orphans. They were executing a coordinated plan. Samuel, the oldest, stepped forward. "I'm Samuel Brennan. These are my siblings. Crawford killed our father. We wrote to Miss Eleanor, so she'd come and see the truth. We needed someone who could stop him." Eleanor felt her breath leave her. Thomas hadn't been a stranger offering charity. He'd been their father. And these children had built an elaborate scheme to save themselves. "Drop the weapon and release the child," Sheriff Dalton ordered, raising his rifle. Crawford's men tensed, reaching for their guns. Eleanor calculated. For them, 5 deputies and the children, who were clearly more prepared than anyone expected. Samuel called out, "If it were you, Miss Eleanor, would you trust the law or fight for Lucy yourself?" Her heart raced. She lunged toward Crawford, grabbing his gun and forcing away as it discharged. The shot tore into the porch beam. Lucy rolled free as Eleanor and Crawford struggled for the weapon. "Now!" Samuel shouted. From behind the barn, the children launched rocks from slingshots while Samuel appeared with Thomas's rifle. Gunfire erupted as the deputies opened fire. Crawford's men scattered, but they were outnumbered. Eleanor wrestled the gun away, but Crawford struck, wrapping his fingers around her throat. "You should have stayed out of this, schoolmarm." But Lucy, fierce as a wildcat, bit into Crawford's wrist. He howled and released Eleanor, who gasped for air. "The root cellar, behind the barn!" she screamed. Dalton sprang into action, ordering his deputies to secure the scene. But Crawford wasn't finished. He drew a knife and advanced. Samuel stepped between them, rifle steady. "You murdered my father. You beat us. You tried to enslave us," Samuel said, his voice steady. "Give me one reason not to shoot." Crawford's mask slipped into something colder. "Because I'm not alone. Kill me and others will come. We're part of something much bigger." Eleanor felt her blood run cold. "There are dozens more," Crawford whispered. "Hundreds, maybe. Children taken from desperate families. Sold, traded, hidden. You kill me, you'll never find them." Sheriff Dalton's face turned pale as he emerged from the cellar. "We found Thomas. Shot in the back, just like the boy said." "You've got no proof," Crawford hissed. "It's my word against traumatized children." But Eleanor studied the children. They moved like soldiers. There was more to this. "Samuel, tell me who you really are." The boy's eyes flicked to the others. After a pause, he lowered the rifle slightly. "Thomas wasn't our father. He found us, all of us. We were stolen from other places Crawford owned. He rescued us, tried to give us a home. Lucy stepped forward. He wrote to you because he couldn't protect us alone." The truth hit Eleanor hard. This was never about marriage. It was a desperate attempt to save lost children from a monster. Sheriff Dalton grabbed Crawford by the collar. "How many more properties?" Crawford laughed bitterly. "You think this ends here? We've got buyers in Denver, suppliers in Kansas, contact across 3 territories. Children are valuable. Families pay." Samuel's hands trembled as he raised the rifle again. "You didn't count on us fighting back." Crawford's grin turned venomous. "You've started something you can't stop. My partners will burn this place to the ground." Dalton shook his head. "We'll bring the law." "With what army?" Crawford sneered. "They'll vanish before you get close." Samuel locked eyes with Eleanor. "Unless we make them come to us." "No!" Dalton barked. "I won't use children as bait." Samuel stood firm. "Sheriff, with respect, we've been bait our whole lives." Eleanor stepped closer, pushing aside the voice in her head that screamed at her to turn and run. "This is between you and me," she said firmly. Crawford's lip curled. "It's between me and anyone who interferes with my business," he snapped. "These children owe me labor. Their guardian's death doesn't erase the debt." Sheriff Dalton dismounted with deliberate care, keeping his hands visible. "Thomas Brennan is dead," Crawford announced hastily. "An accident. His horse threw him against the rocks. A tragic loss." But before the lie could settle, the oldest boy spoke up, his voice cutting through the tension with unexpected strength. "That's not true, Sheriff," he declared. "We saw it. Crawford shot him in the back when he tried to ride for town." Dalton's face stiffened, his jaw tightening as his hand hovered near his weapon. He had known Thomas. Eleanor could see in the way the sheriff's eyes narrowed with growing fury. "Grief confuses children," Crawford insisted, but his face was slick with sweat now. Lucy, her small voice barely audible with a gun pressed against her head, whispered, "Show him the root cellar, Sheriff. Show him where Crawford hid the body." Eleanor's mind raced. These children had lived above their father's hidden grave for 2 weeks, forging letters and pretending everything was fine. They weren't just survivors, they were fighters. The boy continued, "Miss Eleanor, tell the sheriff why you really came here." Eleanor realized then what the children needed. "I came here to marry Thomas Brennan," she said, her voice steady. "We've been writing for months. But when I arrived, I found only these children, and this man claiming everything belonged to him." Dalton's eyes locked on Crawford. "You told me Thomas left for Denver with cattle buyers." Crawford's grip on Lucy tightened, but Eleanor noticed something more. The children were moving, subtly disappearing around the house. Not escaping, but taking positions. These children had a plan. "I have questions," Eleanor continued. "Why would man planning to marry leave 6 children alone? And why does this man have rope burns on his wrists and fear in his eyes?" The oldest boy stepped forward. "My name is Samuel Brennan. Crawford killed our father and tried to enslave us. We wrote to you, Miss Eleanor, because we needed a witness." The truth struck her like a lightning bolt. Thomas hadn't been their guardian. He had been their father. These children had engineered an elaborate plan to save themselves. Sheriff Dalton raised his rifle. "Crawford, release the child and drop your weapon." But Crawford's men began moving, hands near their guns. Eleanor counted quickly. For criminals, 5 lawmen and 6 incredibly brave children. Samuel called out, "If you were in my place, Miss Eleanor, would you wait for the sheriff to handle it? Or would you act?" Eleanor looked at the trembling Lucy and the cold calculation in Crawford's eyes. Her father's voice from childhood chess games echoed in her mind. "Sometimes, Eleanor, the queen must risk herself to save the king." She made her decision. With a sudden lunge, she slammed into Crawford's arm, forcing the gun away from Lucy's head. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the air. Lucy rolled free as Eleanor and Crawford crashed to the ground, struggling for control of the pistol. Samuel shouted, "Now!" The children's plan snapped into motion with terrifying precision. The younger ones, armed with slingshots, launched rocks while Samuel emerged with Thomas's hunting rifle. The sheriff and his deputies opened fire on Crawford's accomplices, who dove for cover but were quickly outgunned. Eleanor wrestled the pistol free, but Crawford grabbed her throat, squeezing hard. "You should have stayed out of this, schoolmarm." Before he could finish, Lucy bit into his wrist like a wild animal. Crawford screamed and released Eleanor, who gasped for air and scrambled away. The root cellar. Eleanor yelled, "Behind the barn." Dalton's face turned hard as granite. "Jeremiah, take 2 men and secure the others. Marcus, with me." But Crawford wasn't done. He pulled a knife from his boot and advanced, murder blazing in his eyes. Samuel stepped between them, rifle raised, steady as stone. "You killed my father," Samuel said, voice unwavering. "You beat us. You tried to sell us like animals. Give me one reason why I shouldn't pull this trigger." Crawford's expression shifted. Rage, fear, calculation. "Because I'm not the only one," he whispered. "There are others. Networks. If you kill me, they'll come for you and these kids." The horror struck Eleanor like ice in her veins. "What networks?" she demanded. Crawford grinned wickedly. "You think I'm alone? There's a whole system. Orphans, widows, desperate people. We've been moving children like livestock for years." Dalton's men finished subduing Crawford's accomplices, as his words hung in the air like poison. "How many children?" Samuel asked. "Dozens, maybe hundreds." "Then you're going to help us find them," Samuel said coldly. Dalton approached. "We found Thomas, shot in the back, just like they said." His stare pierced Crawford like a blade. "You murdered him, and now you'll pay." Crawford sneered. "In court? My word against a pack of traumatized children." But Eleanor was studying Samuel and his siblings. They moved like a trained unit. There was something more here. "Samuel," she said gently, "tell me the truth. Who are you really?" The boy hesitated, then looked at his siblings. After a moment, he spoke. "Thomas Brennan wasn't our father. He found us on Crawford's other farms. We were sold, abandoned. Thomas rescued us and brought us here. He wrote to you because he couldn't protect us alone." The truth hit her like a crashing wave. Thomas hadn't sought a wife. He'd sought an ally, and Crawford had killed him for it. Dalton seized Crawford by the collar. "How many more farms?" Crawford laughed. "Buyers in Denver, suppliers in Kansas, distribution across 3 territories. You think this ends here? You've just scratched the surface." Samuel raised his rifle again. "But you didn't count on us fighting back." Crawford's grin widened. "You're outnumbered, outgunned. My partners will come looking for me tomorrow. And when they don't find me, they'll burn this place to the ground." A heavy silence followed. The children were terrified but unbroken. "Then we run," Eleanor said, surprising even herself. Dalton shook his head. "Running solves nothing. We need justice." "Against an entire network?" Eleanor countered. with a handful of deputies and a group of children? Samuel looked at her, his eyes fierce. Unless we make them come to us. Eleanor's blood ran cold. What do you mean? We use ourselves as bait. Dalton shook his head firmly. Absolutely not. But Samuel stood his ground. With respect, Sheriff, we've been bait our whole lives. This time we choose. Reluctantly, Dalton agreed. Crawford, under threat, revealed the meeting point. Devil's Canyon. Narrow, isolated, perfect for either a rescue or a slaughter. At sunset, they marched into the canyon. Eleanor sat with her hands bound, playing her part. The children huddled beside her. Crawford led them, his loose bonds ready for deception. Above, Dalton's men waited, hidden among the rocks. Samuel carried a hidden mirror for the signal. 12 riders appeared, Crawford's partners. "You're late," the leader called out. "Complications," Crawford replied, "but profitable ones." The man studied the captives coldly. These are too old for the Denver buyers, except maybe the girl. Eleanor's heart clenched. She forced herself to remain still. Samuel's voice cracked with feigned terror. "Please, don't separate us. We'll work hard. Just don't take Lucy." The performance worked. Vaughn's suspicion eased. Shut them up. But more riders appeared from the far end. Unexpected men. Martinez's crew. They weren't part of the plan. This canyon's about to turn into a battlefield, Eleanor realized. Samuel signaled with the mirror, just as gunfire erupted between Vaughn's men and Martinez's forces. Dalton's deputies joined from above, bullets ricocheting everywhere. Eleanor shielded Lucy as chaos erupted. The children moved quickly, freeing themselves and retrieving hidden weapons. The firefight lasted 10 brutal minutes. When the smoke cleared, Vaughn's men lay dead. Martinez's gang had fled. Dalton's men secured the survivors. Crawford, bleeding but alive, looked at Eleanor with a twisted grin. "You actually pulled it off." Dalton reported, "We found ledgers, names, locations. Dozens of missing children. This network is finished." 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the courtyard of a new home for rescued children, funded by Crawford C's fortune. Samuel, now 15, was teaching the younger ones how to read. She had never married Thomas Brennan. She had found something even more precious, a family forged not by blood, but by courage. 23 children had been saved, each carrying their own scars, but finally finding what they never thought possible: hope. As Eleanor watched Samuel help a little boy sound out words, she smiled, knowing she found exactly where she belonged.